Thanks very much, Rosie. Thanks very much for an amazing event this evening. And really, I think it is appropriate to please join me in congratulating the PFP team, Louise. I think all of us will have a really nice and good sleep tonight because our hearts are warm because of all the amazing work that the PFP does. I know that when you do this kind of work, you don't do it to get awards. So the WISE Awards or the Internal Auditors Awards and all the other recognition and awards that PFP have received are not things that you set out to do when you started this amazing change, this amazing movement that has really become a movement. You know, the fact that you've got almost 900 partnerships that are going and continue to grow is an amazing feat and just shows what can be achieved if someone has a dream, someone has a vision, and that vision translates into action. So, well done. Well done. And today, you know, as I was sitting there listening to all the stories of the partnerships that we listened to today, we listened to stories of resilience, we listened to stories of what partnerships are about, because we all know partnerships are absolutely about what Graham was talking about commitment, about trust, about listening to each other, about sharing the stories that we have, and about showing up. And we've had of all these stories today. And we all know that in South Africa, very often, we can talk ourselves into complete depression because of all the challenges that we face in our country. And the story of PFP is a story of social cohesion, of how we as a country can build our nation. We talk of ourselves as a rainbow nation, but very often you just need to switch on the news or read a newspaper. We hear a lot more stories of division, of hopelessness, of crime, and we need to hear a lot more stories about what PFP is about, stories of hope, stories that can really help build our country. And as we all know, education is particularly important if we're going to build our nation. We have to do something about making sure that the lives of the young people, who are, by the way, 100% of the future, are looked after, that these young people are developed, not only in terms of knowledge, but also in terms of how we build them as responsible young adults and young people who are responsible. And when you look at it, the Department of Basic Education particularly, I mean, it's doing its bit. I know this for a fact, you know, as a co-founder of the National Education Collaboration Trust. But the system, the public system, can never succeed on its own. It can't work on its own. We have a national development plan that calls for active citizenship, and it calls for all of us to play a role. And very often, many of us sit on the sidelines, we talk at dinner tables or around braais around how the situation in our country is hopeless. And very often, a lot of people don't even know how to get involved. And here is a framework which the PFP has developed that allows a lot more people to get involved, to improve the lot of our people that are not as privileged as a lot of us happen to be in our country. So there's a lot that we can do if we simply join the movement. The fact that we're sitting in this room with partners, with principals, with people who are working together, shows what can be achieved. And I often say, when you look at a lot of the people who are involved, seconded or supported by corporate South Africa, it's amazing actually to know and to learn how much these people who help and get involved as partners with PFP develop their own leadership skills themselves. Because, you know, I've been involved in the private sector for many years. I can tell you now, as a person who's involved in education, that solving corporate problems, running a company, is by order of magnitude easier than solving social problems. So I often say to a lot of people, my former colleagues in the private sector, that if I had a say, one of the things that I would do as part of leadership training and development in corporates is actually to almost force all the people and employees, middle management people, to get involved in initiatives such as PFP, because if you get involved in such initiatives, the way that you develop leadership skills is by far better than sending someone to a business school or running a leadership development program in isolation, in other words, in the context of the company. Because as the story was told by Lebu and Dave and Graham and Snooky and Mahmoud, the issues that you confront in dealing with social problems are really, really complex. I'm involved in higher education these days, and we support students that come from poor and working class backgrounds. We often come across many, many students at universities who may even have obtained straight A's from a basic education system. And they get to higher education, they get to universities, and very often with their straight A's, they don't succeed. And we found that very often, and this was mentioned by Graham in his talk, that by providing these students with social skills, with life skills, with psychosocial support, you may actually get a student who may have been a marginal student when they entered university. And by just providing them with that support, they're able to succeed and they're able to prosper. Because someone cared, someone understood that a human being is a very complex being. And especially as we go into the fourth industrial revolution, and there's a lot of talk these days about 4IR or the fourth industrial revolution, increasingly, the skills that we need to build amongst our young people, the character traits that we have to support and develop, are particularly important, if not more important than the knowledge that we give in mathematics or history or geography or science. Because as the world becomes a lot more complex, we need young people who have the skills to be able to communicate, to be creative, to problem solve. We need young people who are resilient, who are curious, a lot more than their need to understand mathematics. Of course, with technology today, they'll be able to see or know where to find that knowledge. What is important are the skills and the character that we've got to give to the young people. So that's why when I look at PFP and the stories that have been told tonight, and I'm sure obviously there are a lot more stories out there from more than the 868 partners that the PFP has structured. PFP provides a case study of what we need to do as a country as we think about the curriculum and how we should be looking at learning and teaching in our schools. If I just think of, the stories that Mem Lebu or even Snooky told here tonight as leaders, as principals of the schools, and you think about the curriculum that we have. Let's just take life orientation, which, by the way, I don't think in the current way that the curriculum is structured should even be an examinable subject. But there's a case study in terms of what PFP does that talks about what we should be teaching young people, because the same skills around leadership that we're developing for the partners as well as for the principals that are involved in PFP are exactly the same skills that we should be imparting to the young people. And in fact, if you think about life orientation as a subject, we should be talking about leadership. We should be talking about all of these skills around communication, creativity, critical thinking, as well as the character traits that we've got to build amongst young people that are important, because we all know that all these young people that are in the primary schools or the high schools, that are part of the partnership of the PFP, are exactly the skills that you and I never got at school. We never got these skills at school. I can just tell you my story. I had a typical Zulu mother as a parent. And for some reason, I don't know how she got this, when you turned 9 years old, there's something that all of you, and I come from a family of 7, all of you have to do. You have to know how to take a bus from a township on your own and go to town, and you are sent to go and do something in town. And it was a way of making sure that as children we were streetwise. And I remember my first trip where I went to town. I took a Patco bus from Umlazi Township outside of Durban, and I was sent to go and collect my father's dry clean in town. And needless to say, I got lost, and if it wasn't for the fact that we have the beach and I couldn't go any further, I was going exactly the wrong direction. And it was getting dark, it was getting late, and I was panicking and I was crying. Needless to say, someone gave me direction to go to a Patco bus stop, and I found my way back home. So when I got home, it was around 7 p.m. in the evening, and my mother simply said, "Oh, you're back." So the moral of that story is that the skills I acquired because my mother believed in me have allowed me to do all the things that I've been able to do. And this is what... And therefore, as I was sitting there listening to the stories that were told by Lebu and Dave and Graham and Snooki and Mahmoud, it really just occurred to me that when you listen to these stories, these are exactly the stories that we should be using, and maybe social scientists should be using around the skills that we need to build amongst our young people so that we have a strong country, we have a competitive country. Because after all, there's nothing wrong with our children. There's absolutely... We're the ones who fail our young people. So the examples of what the PFP movement has managed to do is a lesson and a case study of how we should be thinking about social cohesion in a country, how we should be thinking about how we can impart some of the really critical and important skills that we need to impart and develop amongst our young people. It is a story of partnership. It's a story of how the private sector can work with the public system. It's a story of how young and old people can work together. It's a story of how we can really change our country for the better. Thank you.